everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Orange Zeppelin here, and I have noticed pretty recently a few people asking, how do you go about making a zine, or how do you go about making a comic? And I have a particular method that I've developed for doing both because I've made a lot of comics and a lot of zines over the years. I'm definitely not an expert in anything at all, really, but I do have a particular method that I've come up that works pretty well for me when coming up with a comic. So today I'm going to share with you guys what that method is. The great thing about zines is that there's no rules and you can really do whatever you want. The worst thing about zines is there's no rules and you can do whatever you want. Sounds like the opposite of a problem until you're stuck on what you want to do. My zine started basically as mini magazines with articles, art, and comics before switching to being a full comic featuring a single story, so that's what I'll share how to make today. First, I like to decide a page range for my comics. It's especially important when assembling a comic for printing because you need to know how it's going to be assembled. If you don't want a printed comic, you don't need to worry so much about this step, but it's good to plan a page range for your story page. I have a few templates that give me an idea of how the end result will look like, and they're going to serve as a cheat sheet for how they're going to be printed. We're going to see those later in the video. I also like to know where the exact middle of the comic will be, because that is the best place to have art that stretches across 2 full pages. Next, I type up a script and make thumbnail sketches of page layouts as I go. My comic Whoa Awesome Space Babe needs to be planned and typed up like a proper script since it's a bigger project, but Brain Fart comics can be a little more loose. Once I know what I'm going to write, I prep my pages. Brain Fart Comics pages are drawn to match the final printing size, which is basically an 8.5 by 11 sheet of printer paper folded in half. I can fit 3 of those onto one of these big Bristol board pages. For Whoa Awesome Space Babe, each page gets its own piece of paper, in this case Deleter manga paper. Nighthawk's Bulge needs a lot of space. Next is paneling, which I use a rotary mat to do. This way I can use the guidelines to get something somewhat resembling straight lines. I draw all my panels on every page before I start penciling just to streamline the process. Then I start penciling. You always want to draw fairly light because the pencils need to be easy to erase, not just because of mistakes, but because you'll be erasing them after inking. During the penciling process, you'll also be adding in the dialogue. In the past, I've done this on the computer, but I don't really like the contrast of the digital text with my line art style. It just looks too noticeably artificial, so I worked on improving my hand lettering. Next, I begin my inking process with the panel outlines and the text for the whole page before inking everything else. I have to be a bit careful since I'm left-handed, and oftentimes I'll use fountain pen, so smearing is a very real danger in my art. Sometimes I'll actually ink starting from the bottom right corner of the page specifically to avoid this happening. Once I have the basic outline inked in, I let everything dry and then carefully erase the pencils. Then I go back in and do more inking, thickening any lines that need it and doing solid black inks. At this point, you could do several things. If this was Whoa Awesome Space Babe, I would scan this page as a black and white bitmap and then prep this for digital coloring, which is a whole different can of worms. But for Brain Fart Comics, I'm going to do this in a watercolor wash. I'm still going to keep this grayscale for printing reasons, but you can do just about anything you want. As always, you should make sure that your media works well on the paper you're using. You can use cheap-ass printer paper for comics. Some of the better printer papers are actually great for inking and colored pencils, but will bring you unparalleled sadness if you try to watercolor on them. Markers, too, are really finicky about paper, alcohol markers in particular. Bristol and manga manuscript paper is pretty much great for anything you want to throw at it, but just know they aren't your only option. This issue I'll be using mostly black ink in washes with a few alcohol markers and some white gel pen. Once everything looks finished, it's time to scan. This is the part of the process that'll make you want to drink. So I'll be scanning these into Photoshop in color and then desaturating them. Even though I could scan in black and white, this just looks better for some reason. I don't know why. I'm going to crop the page, adjust the contrast and lighting, and get it prepped to drop into a template. This template is basically an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper on its side, split in two so I know exactly where the middle is. And this right here is probably the weirdest part. Remember our templates? They're going to be our best friends here. It helps to have a cheater guide sketched out so you know exactly how to assemble the pages. This comic is going to be 5 folded pages, printed double-sided, so I need to know where to put what page. We're overall going to make 10 different page spreads. So I'll explain with the first spread. When the zine folds out, the blank back page will be on the left with the cover on the right. That becomes zine spread 1A, as I'll call it. On the other side, we'll have the intro page on the left with the final page, in this case page 17, on the right. This becomes spread 1B. You don't really have to call it anything as long as you know that on this first sheet of paper, blank cover and cover spread need to pair with the intro and page 17 spread. We're going to continue assembling the rest of the pages with this same logic. This second sheet is going to have one side set as page 16 and 1, with the second side set as 2 and 15, etc., etc. Now we have arrived at the most nerve-wracking part of the process, the printing. Obviously, we're printing double-sided. Select print on the short side when you do that. If you can't find the double-sided printing option in whatever program you're printing with, this is something that I have not figured out how to do directly out of Photoshop, actually. Don't worry, there is an annoying way to deal with that. We're just going to print one of these spreads and then feed the paper back into the machine so it will correctly pass through. For me, I have to put it in the exact orientation that it came out, and set up to print the corresponding second side. Now you can see that our first sheet has been correctly printed on both sides. This is probably where a photocopier would make your life easier, or even a print service like your local copy shop, which I've used in the past. It's also important to note that when printing, you'll need to take your paper into consideration. I like a heavier paper for the cover and back spread, something lighter but still good quality for the inside. I want it to be easy to flip through. One of my zine making friends taught me to use colored paper for the cover spread, and I really like how that ends up looking. Repeat this printing process ad nauseum until you've got a stack of each spread.
This is where the fun begins.
Take your spreads, stack them up one by one, staple the middle of the back, ideally with a long arm stapler if you have one. Fold it over and use something like an art bone to work the crease. And boy frickin' howdy, you just printed your own comic. And you should be damn proud of yourself. Obviously, that's not the only way to do things. You'll find new methods through experimentation and from learning by reading other zines. But hopefully this video has given you some ideas on making your own comics and zines. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great time making art.